"William, we want our share of the 20 million, my father-in-law Gerald announced with the subtlety of a sledgehammer smashing glass. I was still holding the urn containing my wife Rebecca's ashes when he materialized at my front door, just 48 hours after the funeral. Gerald, a burly 62-year-old man, wore a cheap suit that reeked of mothballs and ambition. Beside him, my mother-in-law Patricia nervously adjusted her knockoff handbag, her small calculating eyes scanning every corner of our living room like a human taximeter. "She was our daughter," Patricia added, her voice laden with performative grief that was a decade too late. "We have legal rights to this inheritance. My name is William Carter. At 41, I just buried the only woman I ever truly loved. Rebecca died after a 2-year battle with aggressive cancer, a fight we faced alone while her parents lived their perfect lives across the country, pretending she didn't exist. Now, with the smell of funeral flowers still lingering on my clothes, he appeared like vultures sensing carrion. Rights," I repeated, my voice remaining strangely calm. I placed the urn carefully on the mantelpiece, next to the photo of Rebecca smiling on that spring morning when we found out that his experimental treatment had worked. "Temporarily. What rights exactly do you think you have?" Gerald straightened up, puffing out his chest like an aggressive peacock. "We're her only living relatives. The law is on our side." "The law," I muttered, turning slowly to face them. What they didn't know was that Rebecca had spent the last 6 months of her life not only fighting cancer cells, but also meticulously organizing her estate. Every document, every clause, every comma had been reviewed by her personally, as if she knew exactly when this moment would come. Because she knew her parents better than they ever knew her. "Sit down," she said calmly, gesturing toward the sofa where Rebecca and I watched old movies on nights when chemotherapy left her too weak for anything else. "Let's talk about rights." Patricia hesitated, as if she recognized something dangerous in my controlled tone. But Gerald, always obtuse, threw himself onto the couch with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. "The money came from the company she built," Gerald continued, his voice growing louder. "RedTech Solutions. We invested in it when it was just an idea." I lied. They hadn't invested a single penny. But I let he keep talking, mentally cataloging every word for future use. $500,000, Patricia added, the numbers coming out with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this conversation. "That's what we gave her to help her get started. Now that she's sold everything for 20 million, we deserve our share." I watched them silently, these strangers who shared DNA with the woman who had held my hand during the darkest nights of the past 2 years. Rebecca had never mentioned any investment on his part. On the contrary, she had built everything from scratch, working 16 hours a day while studying programming at night. "Interesting," I finally said. "And where were you when she needed emergency surgery last year? Or during the 6 months of radiation? Or when she could barely get out of bed?" Gerald waved his hand as if shooing away annoying flies. "We were dealing with our own problems. My arthritis, Patricia's debts. We couldn't travel. But they could drive 8 hours to get here the moment they heard about the money." "William," Patricia leaned forward, trying a more maternal approach, "we know you're hurting. We are too. But Rebecca would want his family to be taken care of. She was a good daughter deep down." A good daughter. Her, the woman they kicked out of the house at 18 for refusing to give up her education to work in Uncle Gerald's factory. The same woman who didn't receive a single birthday card in a decade. Who cried in my arms when he didn't show up at our wedding. If you're following this story of family greed and want to find out how this explosive situation unfolds, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any details of this calculated revenge. Because what Gerald and Patricia didn't know was that Rebecca had recorded a special message for this very moment. And when they heard her words from beyond the grave, they would understand exactly what kind of good daughter they had lost forever. But that would only be the beginning of the surprise that awaited them. As I watched Gerald settle into the sofa as if he owned the house, memories of Rebecca flooded my mind like slides from a painful presentation. She had told me about the day he kicked her out of the house, but seeing these two strangers claiming rights to his inheritance gave new dimension to the cruelty I had always known existed. $500,000, I repeated slowly, savoring each word. Interesting. Rebecca never mentioned that investment. In fact, she always said she started the company with $2,000 borrowed from the student bank and a used ping-pong table as a desk. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her chair, his fingers nervously playing with the strap of her purse. Well, it wasn't exactly a formal investment. It was more like family support. We helped with the initial expenses when she was starting out. Family support, I murmured, remembering the nights Rebecca cried in my arms, recounting how she had survived on $23 in her account during his first month living alone. How she had eaten instant noodles for weeks because that was all she could afford. How she had worked 3 part-time jobs while learning programming at night. Gerald leaned forward, her belly pressing against her belt. Look, William, we know this is hard. Losing a wife is terrible. But business is business. RevTech only existed because we supported Rebecca when she needed it most. When she needed it most, I repeated, my voice maintaining the same controlled tone. Tell me about that time. When exactly did you support her? The two exchanged quick glances, and I saw Gerald swallow hard. It was right after she left home, Patricia said quickly. We knew she was stubborn, but also talented. So we decided to invest in her future. Lie after lie piled up between us like dry kindling waiting for a match. Stubborn, I repeated, remembering how Rebecca had described her last conversation with her mother. How Patricia had yelled that she was a selfish ingrate for wanting to study computer science instead of working at Uncle Gerald's factory. How she had called her daughter's dreams spoiled princess fantasies. Rebecca told me about her last day in this house, I said, slowly getting up. About how you locked the doors when she came home from college. About how you threw his clothes out into the yard during a March rain. We change. Oh yes, you did, I agreed, walking over to the bookcase where Rebecca kept her professional awards. You changed so much that you showed up at the hospital during her 2 years of treatment? Or at her wedding? Or did you send her a birthday card in the last decade? Silence. I picked up one of the photographs from the shelf. Rebecca in the hospital, bald, smiling weakly as she held a trophy she had received in the mail from the State Technology Association. She was so weak that day that I had to hold the trophy for her in the photo. Do you know where you were when Rebecca received the Technological Innovation of the Year award? I asked, turning the photo so they could see it. Or when she was on the cover of Tech Businesswoman magazine. Or when her company was selected for the most prestigious startup incubator in the country. Gerald cleared his throat. We weren't. We didn't know about those things. Rebecca didn't keep us informed. She didn't keep you informed, I repeated, carefully putting the photo back in its place. That's strange. Because yesterday I received an envelope from his lawyer. Inside were copies of dozens of Christmas, birthday, Easter, and graduation cards that Rebecca sent to you over the years. All returned. Unopened. With address unknown, written in her own handwriting, Patricia. A woman turned visibly pale. There were also copies of the tickets she sent to our wedding. Returned in the same way. And the invitation to the opening of RevTech's first headquarters. Also returned. It seems Rebecca tried to keep you informed. You chose to ignore her. Gerald stood up abruptly, his face red with anger or shame. That doesn't change anything. We are her family. We are her only living relatives. The law protects us. The law, I said, walking over to my desk and opening a specific drawer. Let's talk about the law, Gerald. I took out a thick folder, meticulously organized. Rebecca had spent months preparing every document, every clause, every comma. She knew her parents better than he knew himself. You think Rebecca didn't see this coming? I asked, opening the folder. That a woman capable of building a $20 million company from scratch wasn't smart enough to protect her legacy from people who abandoned her throughout her entire adult life? Patricia leaned forward, trying to see the documents. What is this? This, I said, turning the first page so they could see, is a complete record of every attempt Rebecca made to contact us over the last 15 years. Letters, emails, phone calls, attempts at reconciliation. All rejected. All documented. All notarized. Gerald swallowed hard. But that's just the beginning, I continued, turning more pages. Here are the medical records showing that Rebecca listed no family as her emergency contact throughout his treatment. Here are her tax returns, showing that he never received a penny of family support. And here. I paused dramatically, reaching the most important section. Here's a video Rebecca recorded specifically for this moment. For when you showed up, because she knew you would, claiming rights you never had. They stood motionless, as if they had seen a ghost. She recorded a message for us? Patricia whispered. Not exactly for you, I corrected. For me. To remind me who his real self is, in case I started to feel sorry for him or have doubts. Rebecca was very specific about what to do if he showed up. I closed the folder and put it back in the drawer. So here's what's going to happen. You are going to leave my house right now. You are going to go back to her mediocre lives and pretend this meeting never happened. Because if you attempt any legal action, if you contact any lawyer, if you even mention Rebecca's name in public, I will make this documentation very, very public. Gerald tried to regain his authority. You can't threaten us. We have rights. Rights, I repeated for the third time, but now my voice carried a tone that made them both involuntarily step back. You gave up any rights the day you locked your 18-year-old daughter out of your home. You gave them up when you rejected every attempt that was made by her to rebuild a relationship. You gave them up when you didn't show up while she was fighting for her life. I walked to the door and opened it. Get out. Patricia stood up, trembling, but Gerald was still trying to maintain some control over the situation. This isn't over, William. We're going to sue. We're going to fight for our rights. This isn't the last you'll see of us. I smiled for the first time since they arrived. A small, cold smile that made Gerald take a step back. Oh, Gerald. You're absolutely right. This definitely isn't the last time we'll see each other. In fact, Rebecca left very specific instructions on what to do if you chose this route. And I can guarantee you won't like what's coming. But what he didn't know was that the real surprise wasn't in the documents I had shown her. It was in what Rebecca had discovered about them during the last months of her life. Information that would turn this family dispute into something much, much bigger. Because Gerald and Patricia weren't just absent parents. They were people with secrets of their own. Secrets that my brilliant wife had uncovered. And secrets that I was about to use in ways they could never have imagined possible. 3 days later, my phone rang at 6:30 in the morning. The unknown number should have been a red flag, but I was making coffee, lost in the first moments of peace since the funeral. William Carter. The voice was professional, young, with an accent I couldn't immediately place. Yes. This is Melissa Torres from KQSD News. We've received some very interesting information about the situation surrounding her late wife's estate. We'd like to hear his side of the story. Well, Rebecca Pike's parents contacted us yesterday. They claim that he is illegally denying her his rights as her only living relatives. They mentioned forged documents, emotional manipulation during her illness, and intentional family isolation. Each word was a carefully crafted accusation. Gerald had found someone willing to listen to his distorted version first. No comment, he said, hanging up the phone. But the phone rang again 5 minutes later. And again 10 minutes after that. 4 different reporters, all with slightly different versions of the same story. His in-laws were orchestrating a press campaign. At 8 o'clock, my neighbor Tom knocked on the door, holding a cup of coffee and a worried expression. William, man, have you seen what they're saying online? Tom was retired and spent his days monitoring social media as if it were a full-time job. He had been close to Rebecca for the past 2 years, bringing soup to her when she was too weak to cook, mowing our lawn without being asked. He showed me his phone screen. An article published half an hour earlier on a local blog. Greedy widower denies inheritance to grieving parents. The photo was of Gerald and Patricia outside our house, she holding a handkerchief to her eyes, him with his arm protectively around her shoulders. The timing of the photograph was perfect, capturing them at the moment of maximum performative drama. They said Rebecca tried to reconnect with you before she died, Tom said, reading the article. That you prevented her from seeing her parents during the last few months. Lie after lie, each more elaborate than the last. Tom, I said calmly, you knew Rebecca. You saw her every day for the last year. Did she ever mention wanting to see her parents? He shook his head slowly. She talked about how sad she was not to have a family. But she never mentioned trying to reconnect with them. Exactly. But even as I spoke to Tom, I knew the truth didn't matter anymore. The public narrative was being constructed without me, brick by brick, lie by lie. At 10 o'clock, I got a call from my lawyer, Jennifer Walsh. Her voice was tense. William, he filed a petition in court. contesting the will based on coercion and emotional manipulation. But that's not the worst of it. What else? They've attached an affidavit from a nurse who claims to have witnessed you isolating Rebecca from family visits during her hospitalization. My stomach dropped. What nurse? Amanda Collins. She worked the night shift during the last 3 months of Rebecca's treatment. I remembered her vaguely. A short, nervous woman who always seemed uncomfortable when I asked questions about Rebecca's medication. She had been fired a few weeks before Rebecca's death for protocol violations. Jennifer, Rebecca never had family visits because they never tried to visit. Amanda is lying. I know that. You know that. But we have to prove it. I hung up the phone and sat in the empty living room, staring at Rebecca's urn on the mantel. The house seemed bigger now, every sound echoing differently without her presence to fill it. It was then that I made a fundamental decision. I walked over to her office, a small room on the second floor that she had turned into his personal sanctuary. The walls were covered with award certificates, photographs of development teams, and frames with his favorite code printed in elegant fonts. I sat down in her chair, still adjusted perfectly for her shorter height. I opened the bottom left drawer, where she kept what she called her emergency files. Inside, I found 3 folders organized with her typical precision: family historical documentation, personal projects and communications investigations, confidential. The 3rd folder was new to me. I opened it with trembling hands and found something that completely changed my understanding of the situation. Rebecca had hired a private investigator 6 months before she died. The first few pages documented Gerald and Patricia's current lives. They weren't just absent parents living mediocre lives. Gerald was involved in a tax fraud scheme that went back 5 years. Patricia had been collecting disability benefits while working illegally under a false identity. But that was just the beginning. The following pages revealed something even more disturbing. Gerald wasn't just the cruel, absent father who had abandoned Rebecca. He had been systematically stealing from the company he worked for, diverting employee pension funds to offshore personal accounts. The investigator had traced the transactions. $200,000 over 3 years. Money that was supposed to provide modest pensions for workers at an auto parts factory. Rebecca had discovered all of this. And she had kept quiet. The last page of the folder contained a sealed letter addressed to her, with clear instructions: open only if he takes legal action. With trembling hands, she tore open the envelope. William, if you're reading this, it means that they did exactly what I expected. My father was always greedy, but I never thought he was a criminal. The evidence is all here. Use it as you see fit. They don't deserve a penny of what I built, especially not when that money came from stealing pensions from innocent people. Protect our life, our history, our legacy. With eternal love, Rebecca. She had prepared this documentation not only to protect our inheritance, but to protect the real victims of her parents' crimes. I grabbed his phone and called Jennifer. I need you to come here immediately. And bring someone who specializes in federal financial crimes. Why? Because Gerald and Patricia aren't just absent parents trying to steal an inheritance. They're professional criminals. And Rebecca documented everything. The silence on the other end of the line lasted for what seemed like an eternity. William, are you sure you know what you're saying? I have 200 pages of photographic evidence, bank records, and witness statements. Gerald stole pension funds. Patricia committed benefits fraud. And now they're trying to use the legal system to steal from me too. I'm on my way. I hung up the phone and looked back at Rebecca's urn. She hadn't just waited for them to show up. She had created a complete plan to destroy them if they tried to destroy our legacy. My brilliant wife had turned their greed into her own trap. As Gerald and Patricia crafted her public narrative of grieving parents being robbed by a cruel son-in-law, they didn't realize that every lie brought them closer to a federal prison. The war that he started was about to become something much bigger than a family feud over inheritance. It was about to become a criminal investigation that would expose decades of fraud and reveal exactly what kind of people had raised my wife, and why she had been so determined to cut them out of her life completely. Because when you discover that his own parents steal pensions from honest workers, the decision to protect her chosen family becomes much easier to justify. Jennifer arrived 2 hours later, accompanied by Marcus Holbrook, a former federal prosecutor specializing in financial crimes who now worked as a private consultant. Marcus was a tall, thin man with graying hair and a perpetually serious expression that inspired immediate confidence. "William," Jennifer said, sitting down at the kitchen table, "show us what Rebecca left." I opened the 3 folders methodically, organizing the documents into categories Rebecca had created. Marcus examined each page with the attention of a surgeon, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow pad. "This is extraordinary," he murmured after 20 minutes of silence. Her wife documented a scheme to embezzle funds that goes back 5 years. Offshore transfers, shell accounts, even photographs of original documents. "And this?" I asked, pointing to the section on Patricia. "Disability benefits fraud while working under a false identity. That alone is worth 3 to 5 years in federal prison." Marcus looked at me with something close to admiration. "How long did it take her to put all this together?" 6 months. Even during chemotherapy, she kept researching. Jennifer flipped through the pages of rejected communications. "William, this isn't just evidence of crimes. It's a complete manual on his character. Rebecca has built a case that goes far beyond a dispute over inheritance." My phone rang. It was Tom, my neighbor. "William, you need to see what's happening on her street." I walked to the front window and saw a news van parked across the street. A blonde reporter was doing a stand-up while pointing at her house. "They called the press," Jennifer said, joining me at the window. "Perfect," I replied, surprising them with my calm. Rebecca was expecting this too. I went back to the folders and pulled out a section I hadn't shown them yet. She documented every lie he would tell. Literally. She predicted they would say they invested $500,000 in the company, that I isolated her from her family, that Amanda Collins would lie about hospital visits. Marcus leaned forward. How could she know that? Because it was her. He always inflates financial figures by about 5 times their actual value. Patricia always positions herself as a victim of medical circumstances. And they always find someone willing to lie for money. I grabbed my laptop and showed him the most recent social media posts. Gerald had created a page called Justice for Rebecca, where he posted old photos of her with emotional captions about a loving daughter stolen by manipulation. "Look at the comments," I said, scrolling down the screen. 57 messages of support. But look at the accounts that are commenting. Marcus scanned the profiles. All created in the last 72 hours. No history, no real friends. Fake accounts, I confirmed. Gerald is buying online support to build a public narrative before the trial. Jennifer shook her head. That's social media manipulation. Another federal violation. I pulled up the last section of Rebecca's files. But here's her real masterpiece. The final documents revealed something even I hadn't known until that moment. Rebecca had secretly contacted 3 of the victims of Gerald's pension scheme. Retired workers who had lost their life savings to his embezzlement. She got signed statements, I muttered, reading the statements for the first time. 3 families who lost their retirement because of him. A 73-year-old grandmother who now works as a receptionist because she can't support herself. Marcus stopped taking notes. William, her wife, didn't just document crimes. She identified the victims and built a case for full restitution. "And there's more," I said, turning to the last page. She contacted the federal prosecutor's office 6 weeks before she died. She filed a formal complaint but asked not to be prosecuted until after her death. The kitchen fell silent. Why did she wait? Jennifer asked. I found Rebecca's final letter, sealed with my name on it. Inside, her familiar handwriting explained everything. "William, if you're reading this, it means they did exactly what I hoped he would. I could have exposed everything while I was alive, but that would have given them time to hide evidence, flee, or manipulate the system. Dead, I become a witness they can't attack or discredit. Her lies about our relationship become even more despicable when confronted with the truth about who he really is. Use everything. Protect his victims. And have no pity. He never had any for us." Marcus closed his notebook. "William, his wife turned her own death into a perfect trap. They can't discredit a deceased cancer victim. They can't claim she was manipulated. She died before they knew about the inheritance. And every lie they tell about you only strengthens the contrast with the meticulous documentation she left behind." My phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. William Carter? This is Detective Rodriguez from the police department. We've received a formal complaint against his for emotional abuse and family isolation. I need him to come to the station for questioning. I looked at Jennifer and Marcus. They were both smiling. Detective Rodriguez, I said calmly. I'll be there in an hour. And I'll bring my lawyer, a federal consultant, and approximately 300 pages of evidence that I believe is highly relevant to her investigation. I hung up the phone. Gerald just made the mistake Rebecca was hoping for, she said. He forced an official investigation. Now everything we documented becomes formal evidence. If you've been following this story of family manipulation and meticulous documentation, don't miss the next chapter, where we'll discover how an investigation into abuse turns into a federal operation against large-scale fraud. Because Gerald and Patricia didn't know that, when trying to frame me, they had just opened the door for me to officially present all the crimes Rebecca had discovered about her. Jennifer began organizing the documents into separate folders for official presentation. William, in an hour you're going to turn a false accusation against you into a federal indictment against them. No, I corrected, looking out the window where the news van was still waiting. In an hour, Rebecca will get her ultimate revenge. I'm just the messenger. But there was still one surprise that even Rebecca hadn't anticipated. A surprise that would make Gerald and Patricia's downfall even more spectacular than my brilliant wife could ever have imagined. Because while he was fabricating false evidence against me, he didn't realize that Amanda Collins, the nurse he had bribed to lie, had secrets of her own. Secrets that were about to blow up in their faces when we arrived at the police station. The police station was quieter than usual for a Tuesday afternoon. Detective Rodriguez greeted us in a small interrogation room with beige-painted concrete walls and a metal table in the center. Jennifer and Marcus flanked me on either side, her folders organized with the military precision Rebecca would have admired. Mr. Carter, Rodriguez began, opening a thin file, we have received very serious allegations about his conduct during her illness. Family isolation, emotional manipulation, financial coercion. Detective, Jennifer interrupted politely, before we proceed with these allegations, I would like to present information that may be relevant to your investigation. Rodriguez frowned. What kind of information? Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents 5 inches high. Evidence of a large-scale financial fraud scheme dating back 5 years, involving embezzlement of pension funds and disability benefit fraud. The whistleblowers, Gerald and Patricia Pike, are the prime suspects. The room was silent for 10 seconds. Rodriguez picked up the first documents, his eyes quickly scanning the pages. I saw the moment when it dawned on him. Are these real bank transactions? Authenticated by the bank and the private investigator hired by Mr. Carter's late wife, Marcus confirmed. Rebecca Pike Carter systematically documented her parents' crimes during the last 6 months of her life. Jennifer added the second stack of documents. Here are the statements from 3 families who lost their retirement savings to Gerald Pike's scheme. Her pensions were diverted to offshore accounts controlled by he. Rodriguez called another detective into the room. Detective Kim, a middle-aged Asian woman with a perpetually serious expression, sat down and began examining the documents. William, Rodriguez said, her demeanor changing completely, are you aware that your wife contacted the federal prosecutor's office 6 weeks before her death? I am now. Kim looked up from the papers. She filed a formal complaint, but asked that the investigation not begin until after his death. She said she needed to protect the evidence from interference. My phone vibrated with a text message. Tom, my neighbor, William, Gerald, and Patricia are at her door with cameras. Looks like they brought journalists. I showed the message to Jennifer. Perfect, she said. Detective Rodriguez, we suggest you pay a visit to Mr. Carter's residence right now. I suspect you'll find the suspects trying to manipulate the media once again. 20 minutes later, our small convoy of police cars arrived on my street. The news van was still there, along with 2 others I didn't recognize. Gerald was standing in the middle of the sidewalk, gesturing dramatically as he spoke to 3 different cameras. A cruel man who isolated our daughter from her loving family during her final moments. We're just trying to honor her memory. Rodriguez got out of the car and walked directly toward Gerald. Gerald Pike. Gerald turned, still smiling at the cameras. Yes, that's his. I hope you've come to arrest this man for emotional abuse. Mr. Pike, you are under arrest on suspicion of financial fraud, embezzlement of pension funds, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. The transformation on Gerald's face was instant and complete. The confident smile disappeared, replaced by confusion, then panic. What? This is a mistake. We're here about our daughter. About our rights. Patricia, who had been standing silently beside his car, began to back away toward her car. Patricia Pike, Detective Kim emerged from another car. You are also under arrest for benefit fraud and identity theft. No. Patricia screamed, trying to run. This is persecution. William is making up lies about us. The cameras captured everything. Gerald being handcuffed, Patricia stumbling as she tried to escape, reporters shouting confused questions about financial fraud instead of the inheritance dispute they had expected to cover. But the real twist came when a short, nervous woman got out of one of the police cars. Amanda Collins, the nurse who had lied about me. Amanda, Rodriguez said, are you ready to tell the truth about what Gerald Pike asked you to say? Amanda was visibly shaking, her hands clutching a small purse against her chest. He offered me $5,000 to say that William prevented family visits. But that's not true. Rebecca never had any family visits during the entire time I worked there. In fact... She paused, looking directly at the cameras that were now focused on her. Rebecca specifically told me that if anyone claiming to be his family showed up, I should contact security immediately. She had a restraining order against them that she never used, but always carried with her. Gerald, already handcuffed, tried to approach Amanda. You're lying. We had a deal. That agreement, Detective Kim announced to the cameras, constitutes witness tampering and obstruction of justice. 2 more federal charges. As Gerald and Patricia were placed in separate police cars, the lead reporter approached his car. Mr. Carter, how does it feel to know that the people who accused you of abuse are being arrested for federal crimes? I looked directly into the camera. Rebecca knew this day would come. She documented everything because she believed that the truth always prevails, even if it takes time. These are not grieving parents fighting for justice. They are criminals who stole honest workers' pensions and tried to steal the inheritance she left to charitable causes. Jennifer leaned in and whispered in my ear, William, we just got a call from the federal prosecutor's office. They want to meet tomorrow. It looks like Rebecca's case has opened up a much larger investigation. I watched the cars drive away, taking Gerald and Patricia to a federal prison where they would discover that lying about a woman who died of cancer was the least of his problems. But even as I savored this moment of justice, I knew that Rebecca had planned something even bigger. Because the folder that she left behind had one last section I hadn't opened yet. A section marked, for when he's in prison. And considering how brilliantly my wife had orchestrated every move so far, I suspected that the real revenge was just beginning. Because Gerald and Patricia didn't know that Rebecca had uncovered not only his financial crimes, but also where he had hidden the stolen money. And tomorrow, when the federal prosecutor opened that last folder, he would discover that my wife hadn't just documented crimes. She had tracked down every penny he had stolen and created a plan to return it to the families he had destroyed. The next morning, I sat in the office of Federal Prosecutor Michael Harrison, an imposing room lined with bookshelves filled with legal codes and photographs of important officials. Jennifer and Marcus flanked me again, but this time I carried the final folder Rebecca had left behind. Mr. Carter, said Harrison, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a presence that commanded immediate respect, the information her husband documented has opened a federal investigation that goes far beyond the crimes of Gerald and Patricia Pike. I opened Rebecca's last folder for the first time in her presence. The first few pages revealed something extraordinary. Rebecca had not only located the money Gerald had stolen, but she had traced an entire network of corruption involving 12 different companies in 5 states. Harrison continued, leafing through the documents with growing admiration, identified a money laundering scheme that diverted more than $8 million in pension funds over the course of a decade. The last section of the folder contained something even more impressive. Rebecca had secretly contacted each of Gerald's victims, documented their individual losses, and created a complete restitution fund using part of her own inheritance. She earmarked $5 million from the sale of the company specifically to compensate the families who were harmed, I murmured, reading her final letter aloud. Every penny stolen by him will be returned with 15% interest per year. Jennifer looked at me with something close to amazement. William, Rebecca turned her own death into a mechanism for social justice. 3 weeks later, I was in federal court watching Gerald and Patricia receive his and her sentences. Gerald was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for embezzlement, financial fraud, and money laundering. Patricia received 8 years for benefits fraud and complicity. But the real satisfaction came when the judge announced the restitutions. The court orders that all of the defendants' assets be liquidated to compensate the victims. In addition, thanks to the testamentary provisions of Rebecca Pike Carter, each affected family will receive full compensation plus interest, totaling approximately $7.2 million. I watched Gerald being handcuffed once again, his face a mask of despair and disbelief. Until the very last moment, he could not comprehend how he had been outmaneuvered by a daughter he considered weak and a son-in-law he had completely underestimated. Patricia cried throughout the sentencing, but her tears came too late. After court, I went to visit Mrs. Eleanor Watson, one of Gerald's victims. She was 75 years old and had lost $40,000 of her pension, her entire financial security for her retirement. "Mr. Carter," she said, holding the refund check with trembling hands, "her wife has given me back not only my money, but my dignity. I won't have to work as a receptionist until I die." That was the first time I had cried since Rebecca's funeral. 6 months later, the Rebecca Pike Carter Foundation was a reality. We used the remaining $15 million from the estate to create a program that protected elderly workers from financial fraud, provided free legal services to low-income families, and funded cancer research. Marcus, who had become a close friend throughout the process, helped me set up a monitoring system that prevented future schemes like Gerald's. Rebecca knew that his death would be the perfect catalyst, he told me during a foundation meeting. She turned personal tragedy into systemic change. A year after the events, I received a letter in prison. It was from Patricia. "William, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand what we lost when we abandoned Rebecca. Not just a daughter, but the chance to be part of something bigger than our own fears and greed. She became the extraordinary woman she was in spite of us, not because of us." I didn't respond to the letter, but I kept it. Not for forgiveness, but as a reminder of how the truth eventually finds its way to the surface, even through the hardest of hearts. Today, 2 years later, I wake up every morning in a house Rebecca and I chose together, surrounded by photographs of our happy moments and certificates from the foundation hanging where she always wanted them to be. The money that Gerald and Patricia coveted so much never brought happiness to he and her. In prison, they discovered that ill-gotten wealth is always temporary, while the legacy Rebecca built through honest work and genuine love will continue to impact lives for generations. The most powerful revenge was not seeing them behind bars, although that brought satisfaction. It was proving that a person guided by purpose always overcomes those motivated only by greed. Rebecca taught me that true strength does not come from fighting back, but from turning pain into purpose, injustice into systemic change. If this story of love, loss, and justice touched his heart, subscribe to the Twist and Revenge channel to discover more stories of ordinary people who found extraordinary strength in the most difficult moments of their lives. Because in the end, Gerald and Patricia got exactly what they deserved. They lost not only her freedom, but also the chance to truly know the exceptional woman they raised and abandoned. And me? I found a new mission in life, building on the legacy Rebecca left behind, proving every day that true love is more powerful than any manipulation, and that justice, though it sometimes takes time, always finds his way. Rebecca didn't just win beyond the grave. She turned our personal tragedy into a force for change that will continue to protect innocent families from predators like her own parents. The last I heard of Gerald and Patricia, they were still serving their sentences, finally paying for decades of cruelty and greed. Me? I'm planting the memorial garden Rebecca always dreamed of, where each flower represents a life our foundation has helped rebuild.